Hello again, everyone. It is time for another edition of the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnick.
Chip, it is our July off-season episode, which means that we will be back to college football preparing for the season the next time you and I do one of these Silver Bullet podcasts.
We are getting closer and closer every single day.
The summer is flying by, and that's good because we'll have Buckeye football back, but it's also bad because then the summer has passed us by. But actually in Florida, that's not a bad thing. Where I live.
We had some excessively hot days here in Ohio, but I'm sure in comparison to what you experience in Florida almost on a daily basis, you probably would say, oh, it was like a nice spring day, probably.
I mowed my lawn on Sunday at noon in the hot Florida sun here in Orlando, and I'm not sure I've stopped sweating since then as we record this on Monday night. But yeah, I was supposed to actually come to Ohio next weekend and for my high school reunion, but it got canceled because I apparently have a very lame high school that doesn't have enough of a demand for tickets to actually go through with it, and it got canceled for low response. So I don't know. Maybe that means just too many of my high school classmates have died off. I don't know. At my age, that could be, but I will not be making my Ohio trip when I planned. But the good news is that I guess I will probably postpone it and come up to see a game in the fall.
Oh, good. Well, we can talk about the different options that you have, because in terms of one of our topics about attendance at college football games, I can raise some interesting points about why college football is suffering from declining attendance.
Yes. So why don't we get into that to start with? We'll have some interesting topics. We'll talk a little bit about stuff that was said at the Big Ten Media Days and the surrounding time frame. But let's start with Pat Fitzgerald from Northwestern and his discussion of why attendance is down in college football, and he's blaming it on the technology, Chip. He's blaming it on people with their phones and not wanting to go out and experience the pageantry and tradition of college football. Now, I think there is something to that technology talk because, it's rather cost prohibitive for a lot of people to take their families to a college football game these days, but the coverage is fantastic on television, and a lot of people have very large televisions now, or multiple televisions where they can watch 2 or 3 games at the same time. So I think there's something to the technology argument, but are you buying what Pat Fitzgerald is selling with these kids today?
No, I'm not. I'm not buying the argument that they're on their phones. For anyone who hadn't seen the Twitter clip that Michael's referring to, feel free to Google it and you'll see exactly what we're talking about. But I'm not going to blame the decline on cell phone usage by teenagers or young adults that are in the stands. I'm going to. You mentioned it a moment ago. I'm going to blame it. I guess I can't speak intelligently about the ticket pricing strategies of every college football program throughout the United States, but I have a pretty good understanding as to how Ohio State handles theirs. And I think you mentioned the idea that it's cost prohibitive, that to be able to take your family to a game, a case in point. And this was just, prior to us recording, checking out the Ohio State website. If you're interested in going to see Ohio State play Michigan State, good game, good opponent. We've talked about how Michigan State has given Ohio State fits throughout the years. But the lowest price ticket that came up on the Ohio State website was $147. The Wisconsin game at the end of October 26th, the lowest ticket, single ticket, mind you, $170. To go to the final home game of the season. Now, granted, Penn State has been a tremendous opponent for Ohio State the last few years, but the lowest ticket there was $195. So you try and, to me, that has nothing to do with people being on their cell phones. It has everything to do with the fact, as you said, it's cost prohibitive. I can be at home with maybe a stellar television setup. I don't have to wait in line for the bathroom. I don't have to pay outrageous prices for beer. If anything, like the biggest frustration I have when I'm watching a game at home, quite frankly, is the overabundance of commercials. But quite honestly, this argument that it has anything to do with cell phones, I think, is just completely misguided. And the mere fact that Ohio State hasn't sold out any games since the single game tickets went on sale as of Friday should be a blaring call to Ohio State's athletic department that they need to adjust their ticket pricing philosophy, because this is something that, for the last several months they've been talking about these different plans on how you could buy different games and the single game tickets, and the mere fact that they have not announced any of the home games as being sellouts should give them some kind of indication that they are pricing themselves completely out of the market.
Yeah, it's kind of indicative of everything that's going on throughout sports. I mean, I've been going to the Daytona 500, I think, pretty much every year since 1993. And when I started going, tickets were at a certain level, and they have more than doubled since I started going to the Daytona 500. And it's not just the ticket price; it's every ancillary item that you need to pay for when you go and experience it. It's the parking has gone from free to $50 across the street from the track. It's your $3 beer is now $8 or $9. It's all of that in addition to the ticket prices. And if you want to go to the Daytona 500, you used to need to get on a waiting list. Now you can walk up to the gate on the day of the race and buy a ticket in almost any section you want to sit in. So college football is sort of following that path, and it's not just college football. I mean, I think there are social media sites that are completely devoted to baseball games, Major League Baseball games, where hardly anybody's in the seats. I can't remember one off the top of my head, but they basically tweet out pictures of the mostly empty stadiums. We're seeing it in Major League Soccer. We're seeing it in the NFL. We're seeing these large events that used to sell out regularly not selling out like they used to, and because it's not just the ticket price, it's the parking, it's the drinks, it's the food, it is all of that. And nowadays people have gotten to the point where you can sit at home and have a great experience for nothing or next to nothing. If you might go run to the store, buy some chips and beer, but if you want us to go to the game and cheer and support the team, there are plenty of people willing to do that, but you have to make it something that people can afford, or you have to make it something that people can't live without, so that the fact that they will pay up that much money.
Well, we joke about the Ohio State spring game, the mere fact that, all right, a lot of people, it's a meaningless exhibition of the final practice of spring football. It doesn't count in the standings. The coaches are secretly hoping that nobody gets hurt. All these valid reasons all throughout the spectrum. But the main reason why Ohio State usually has, if not a completely sold out stadium, that's kind of more dependent on the weather in recent years, is the simple fact is that it's so inexpensive to go. And even the local newspapers like the Columbus Dispatch and other radio stations in the Columbus area will point out the fact that this is a great opportunity for people who can't afford to go to games in the fall. And then, as I said a few moments ago, throughout the spring, throughout this summer, you see on Ohio State's website all the different ticket options that they're trying to peddle to people. And obviously people aren't buying because they still can't afford to do it.
Mm-hmm. I remember and again, I'm not trying to be that guy, the back in my day guy, but I remember my student season ticket being somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 or $50, and that was all of the home games except the first one. Usually the first one, because school hadn't yet started, was a separate ticket, and you could get one of those for, I don't know, 8 or 10, maybe $12 tops. But that's your whole season, and I'm sure the students still get a significant break on the pricing, but when you start talking about more than $100 to sit in the nosebleeds, you are talking about a completely different universe than what sort of we grew up with, and that even accounts for inflation. So it's gotten to the point where people would rather, not everybody obviously, because you still get a whole lot of people at Ohio Stadium for the big marquee matchups. A lot of people would rather stay home and just watch it on TV and not spend that kind of money. It's kind of ridiculous, and it's I understand where some of the pricing issues have come in, where they're making certain games, the marquee games, more expensive than the lesser games, because there's more demand, and you can do that because supply and demand and whatnot, and economics. But Chip, everything used to be the same. Everything used to be easy, affordable. The not just the tickets, but the pricing for everything that you would go and you would buy, and it's not that way anymore. And really, with today's market, adjustments have to be made on the part of the schools and the conferences to make this something that we would rather have you here than watching at home. And to do that, we are going to respond in some way. But that response has not shown any sign of arriving.
And let's throw in the fact that the mere reality of the television contracts, those are going to play a factor, maybe not necessarily in 2019, but in the coming years when the contracts are expiring, because with more and more people going away from cable television and doing things with online services, that's going to play a role in, how, as you said, people being able to stay at home. Well, if the big television contracts aren't going to be doled out by the networks in the manner or fashion that the Big Ten and other conferences are used to, like I said, something's going to have to change, because the consumers are making it abundantly clear, what direction they are not only trending, but where they are very comfortable staying. Mm-hmm. So the athletic directors and the networks, they're going to have to figure out something to win back, I think, in terms of, trying to come back down to some more reasonable expectations. Like you said, maybe not necessarily go back to the days of, all right, $50 for season tickets, but, make it something a lot more reasonable that, if you have a family of 4 or whatever it might be, that you can go without necessarily breaking the bank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been building and building, and they've been milking people for everything they could, and the supply and the demand, like we talked about, was there. You could do that. People would still pay it, but you reach that tipping point eventually, and we're at that tipping point. And I don't agree with Pat Fitzgerald about the cell phones. I mean, if anything, the cell phones can enhance your experience at the game. If you can actually get a signal, you can actually listen to Paul Keels call the game on your phone. There's a lot of things you can do. You can check the stats as you go. I know that a lot of them are on the scoreboard, but some of them aren't. And so you can get in there and you can, if it's not apparent who a penalty was on because you didn't hear the referee, you could look that up. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do with your phone that actually adds to the experience rather than takes away.
I completely agree.
All right, so stay off Pat Fitzgerald's lawn, you kids, and your cell phones and your long hair and your rap music, because Pat's going to take your phone away. He's going to make you talk to each other over dinner. All right, Chip. Next thing I wanted to discuss was Jim Delany, and he had some things to say this recently about how he would like to see the strength of schedule and conference championships take on more weight in the eyes of the selection committee when it comes to the college football playoff. And he lamented the fact that Ohio State has been shut out in recent years when perhaps the Buckeyes were deserving of a spot in the Final Four. You can say what you want about the losses to Purdue and Iowa, but at the same time, the case could be made that one of the four strongest teams in the country was left out because they laid one egg. But this is coming, Chip, from my money, from a guy who did absolutely nothing to publicly push for Ohio State in the run-up to these selections.
You're exactly right. I mean, it's very easy, more than 6 months after the fact, to kind of start making these arguments about Ohio State should have been higher than Georgia. There was nothing that was prohibiting him from saying that, that Saturday night in December when Ohio State was hoisting the Big Ten championship trophy. Instead, he was kind of thinking, just being all gentlemanly and cavalier behind the scenes that the conference championship would be elevated in the eyes of the committee. He could have been making those points all along that Saturday night in Indianapolis. But another thing that kind of perplexed me about Jim Delany's sudden desire to see the Big Ten represented in the Big Ten is that he has some selective memory about if we're going to make conference championships a priority, which I think they should be. He certainly didn't seem to have any problem with Ohio State vaulting over Penn State 3 years ago when Penn State was the conference champion. So it just seems as though he's being very selective in terms of his arguments, when he makes them, how he makes them. The simple fact is, we're talking about a tipping point. In my estimation, it's going to continue with not only the Big Ten, probably the Pac-12, where the fact that these conferences are playing 9 conference games and the SEC and the ACC are not. They're playing 8, and that teams are going to continue to be excluded, which I think will eventually lead to what Jim Delany seemed to be advocating, is that the idea of if you win your conference that you automatically get in, hence an expanded playoff field, which is, I think, would be the ideal scenario. You have all the Power 5 conferences represented. You would have an opportunity for maybe like a group of 5 representative, and then maybe like 1 or 2 wild cards or something like that, like an 18 playoff. The only thing that I would want in that circumstance, and this is something that I think would best serve the college football fans across the country, is if there was an expanded playoff, having the first round of the playoff games on the first round on the home team's site. So in that case, like if Ohio State was like number 4, for example, and they did host, let's say, Georgia as a wild card team or whatever it might be, that have them come up to Ohio Stadium in December and see what that's like. That would be, I think, a great equalizer for not only Ohio State but any team that plays in cold weather by the time the playoffs come around.
Yeah, come on up for another Ice Bowl. That'd be great.
I would love it.
Yeah, you're right about Jim Delany. Now, this is Jim Delany's kind of his swan song season coming up here. He is stepping down, as I understand it, on New Year's Day 2020.
Yes.
And, it makes very little sense for him to, if he's always felt this way, for him to suddenly start spewing this information out into the public when it isn't going to do any good. These are things that he should have been saying, as you said, the night that Ohio State won the Big Ten championship game over Northwestern. He should have been on that soapbox saying, this is a strong college football team. It won its conference. It's a strong conference. They had to go through 9 conference opponents, and then plus a championship game. They won their conference, and all of those things that, it's not necessarily lobbying. All of that stuff is true, and he just chose not to say anything. And that was really, I mean, you and I discussed it back then. I think that he didn't do any favors for the conference he's supposed to be representing. And if he's the commissioner of the Big Ten, it's kind of his job to lobby really is his job. And he didn't even go as far as lobbying. He didn't even go as far as just stating facts and sort of having it be like a little bit of backdoor lobbying, I mean, other conference commissioners do not pussyfoot around. I mean, they'll come right out and say, hey, we deserve to have such and such a team in the college football playoff. And Delany didn't do that. So I think this is very disingenuous to say this at media day, months later.
Well, that was like you said, those arguments were too little, too late to kind of have any influence. And then what I thought was kind of bizarre was that among his biggest regrets, he didn't talk about like what we've been discussing for the past few minutes. Like his biggest regret wasn't that the Big Ten has been excluded from the playoff, but he started talking about back in the 1970s how we should have fought to keep freshmen ineligible. And I'm thinking, good Lord, man, there are people across this country in all seriousness that are thinking that if you wanted to allow a freshman or sophomore in college after a season for them to be eligible for the NFL draft, and you're thinking about trying to make freshmen ineligible, so to even participate, it just seems as though his retirement is coming at a very opportune time for the Big Ten. Yeah. Because it just seems he's looking nostalgically back at things from 40 plus years ago with that nobody else has ever expressed, to the best of my knowledge, any concern about freshmen should be ineligible to participate. I haven't heard that one, and I can't remember the last time, quite honestly. And then, as we've been discussing, the mere fact that he has not been nearly the vocal champion of the Big Ten playoff inclusion as much as you would suspect that he would or should be.
Yeah, more like Jim Delinosaur. As far
Very
as I'm
good.
Concerned. He needs to be put out to pasture. I think, Chip, we're much closer to paying players than we are to reverting back to freshmen being ineligible.
Well, paying players, because I'm sure you see it as much as anybody on Twitter. They're talking about, I think recently in the last week or two, and I'm going to probably get the dollar figure wrong, but there was a settlement that's going to be paid out to players, several $100 million, obviously to all these players, like it's going to probably equal like maybe a couple $1,000s, give or take, because of the fact of the whole likeness issue, with the previous college football video game that is no longer available. But everyone keeps saying, if the NCAA would just come around to letting players get paid for their likeness, we could have the college football video game back. So I agree with you. I think we're closer to that than most people realize. I'm not sure if it'll be happening this season, but it certainly will not come too soon, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is the thing that Chris Spielman had championed, using the players' likenesses and getting compensated for that. And quite honestly, Chip, there is just an unbelievable amount of money that college football generates. And none of that funnels down to the players, really. And yet every year, you and I just talked about the price of tickets and the price of all the other things, the concessions and things of that nature. It makes an insane amount of money. It just keeps charging its consumers more and more money to consume it, and so there's dwindling attendance and that kind of a thing. And and the players are seeing none of it. So who's getting all this money?
I'm sure you saw today the tweets of LSU's new football complex, how luxurious and exorbitant that is. And somebody said, if only there was enough money to pay the players, because when you think about it, like there's a classic example. That I'm glad that LSU has an opulent complex. I'm glad that Ohio State does. I'm glad all these other programs do. But something, that's the kind of thing that you see, and then you wonder, okay, well, why aren't the players getting even, a portion of that? It's absurd.
It really is, and we're not talking about paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're talking about giving them some money so that they can go do things, be kids and that kind of thing, and it seems to be there, and it seems to be something that is doable, and there's just this incredible sort of lag between trying we were just talking about Jim Delany wanting to bring back the old days of no freshman can play, and it just seems to be dragging the feet for no reason other than it's always been this way kind of thing.
Right. And, well, I just think we're gonna get to the Olympic model. I know that Tom Orr and Tony Gerdeman have discussed this on their podcast, that kind of that Olympic model of I'm just going to use for example, when you have athletes that are getting endorsements and they're still technically amateur athletes, but they're paid to whatever, like to drink for Gatorade or Subway or any of that stuff, and they're still eligible to participate in the Olympics. They're getting paid for their likeness in that capacity. So I think Ohio State and other leading universities are going to come to the same conclusion that they have to do something, because it's just going to become more and more of an issue the longer this drags on.
I mean, and it wouldn't be that hard to actually generate even more money. I mean, how about this idea? Have a fan fest every year. People show up. They pay entrance money to get in. They get autographs. The kids get paid for their autographs. I mean, it's their, it's their labor. They're the ones signing their name. But you can make it into an event and actually can bring in more money, and this revenue can also be driven toward, this kind of a thing and compensating players. And it's not anything off of what's currently being brought in. It's a whole new entire, revenue stream.
I agree.
I mean, there are ways to do this to generate even more money, so that these kids can have a little something. I know people, old-fashioned people, they're getting a college education and those cost lots of money. You're right, but how much money do you think a guy like Dwayne Haskins really was responsible for bringing in last year? Oh,
I mean it's not even it's cents on the dollar when you think of the value of his college education and scholarship. I'm not trying to belittle that, but what the money that he brought into Ohio State's athletic department, I mean, that's where I say it's like cents on the dollar is basically what he was being compensated with.
Yeah, I mean, and he's an out of state student, so he would still brought in easily, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 times what his lifetime tuition would cost. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you quantify it, but in a team sport. But I guarantee you, people weren't showing up to watch, the left guard. They were coming to see Dwayne Haskins sling it. So I don't know. I don't want to get too far off on the pay the players tangent. I think that there's room in the world to give the players something for their efforts. In terms of, and not break the schools and not make it so that you can't have cool purple lights in the, on the helmet shelf of the LSU locker room. I don't think it's gonna, I don't think it's going to detract from all that. So anyway, there's some issues with college football, and I think they're not that hard to fix. It just takes some people wanting to actually fix them before it's going to happen. But of course, the power players, the people making the big bucks, they're really not incentivized to do anything other than to keep the status quo. So, at some point there will be some type of an event that will cause change, and whether that could be a college football strike. I mean, I don't know. It could be anything, but I think at some point that tipping of the scales will happen.
Well, one thing that I guess, if thinking optimistically, is that Kevin Warren, who is the incoming Big Ten commissioner, he's going to begin working side by side with Jim Delany in September and take over in January of 2020. And I don't want to say that this issue is going to be, laid on Kevin Warren, exclusively, but I think he's that next generation of leadership, and I'm sure that it'll be up to him as well as the other new athletic directors that are going to have some more forward thinking on this topic.
All right, Chip, why don't we move to another topic I was interested in discussing with you this month, and that is that came out of the media days, is that some of the coaches were discussing realignment of the Big Ten. Sometimes it was just maybe something in passing, and other times, it was more of a generic comment of, this is always going to get looked at because, things just change in college football, and so at some point the alignment will probably change. But the East-West right now certainly seems to work from a logic standpoint. I think a lot of people get hung up on the fact that right now the Big Ten East, and for the last several years, has been much, much stronger than the West from top to bottom. And so that makes people think, well, we need to fix this and make it so that both conferences are weighted equally, which I must remind people that it might sound like a good idea, but that's what led to Leaders and Legends.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that was such a debacle of, I couldn't begin to even suggest how they would break up the teams, because the last thing in the world any Ohio State fan should want is having Ohio State in one division and Michigan in the other, and the possibility that 1 week after they play the game that, I'll see you next week in Indianapolis, kind of a thing. Like it would ruin. That's why that game is so important within Big Ten, fans, across the country. Even they recognize the fact that that game has to be the last, the last game of the season type thing. I don't know how you would. I mean, realistically, it's like if they were to throw like Michigan State, because that was something that I saw, like swap out Michigan State over into the West. But I believe that the way things are is the way that they should be, in terms it makes complete geographic sense to have it divided up into East and West, and we certainly don't want to go down the path of Leaders and Legends or anything that even remotely resembles that again.
Yeah. It's Leaders and Legends was a debacle. You're right. It was terrible, and it was, they could not have corrected that fast enough for my liking, and they did correct it. And right now, the Big Ten East is very strong. You've got Ohio State, you've got Michigan, you've got Penn State. Michigan State. It's difficult to see a time when that would not be the case, but things are cyclical, and Nebraska seems to be a team on the rise, and that's a program that has shown historically that it can be very, very strong for decades at a time. Wisconsin has been a little bit down, but they have been high in the past, and I don't think that there's any reason to necessarily change up the alignment just based on a disparity in quality. I mean, why should the conference even bother with that? I mean, they should just incentivize making the other team stronger. I mean, the other team should just get stronger,
Certainly. I mean, you hit it right on the head about the nature of college football to be very cyclical. That there was a time, it's only been because of Ohio State's dominance over the last 7 years with Urban Meyer at the helm. There was a time prior to Urban Meyer, where Wisconsin was, they were able to claim the Big Ten championship, go to the Rose Bowl, several years in a row. As a matter of fact, in 2012, it was because Ohio State was ineligible to represent their division that Wisconsin was able to go and destroy Nebraska in one of those. I mean, it was still in the dreadful Leaders Legends split at that time. But my point being is that with Wisconsin, they're traditionally solid. Northwestern came out of nowhere last year to win the West. Nebraska is ascending. Minnesota's recruiting better. Right there, I mean, Iowa is always – I mean, it was only a few short years ago when we were having to tell our kids about an undefeated Iowa, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's okay to talk to your kids about an undefeated Iowa, that kind of tagline. So I don't think it's not broken. It doesn't need fixing. I think that the concern that, okay, well, it's too top heavy in the East. Have a little faith in the teams in the West to get better with their recruiting, with their facilities, with the coaches that they're hiring. Like I said, I have every confidence in the world that Nebraska is going to get back to being a much stronger program under Scott Frost's direction. And, if anything, I just think, let's not be premature and create another problem where one isn't even really existing, and nobody's asking for this.
Right.
So that's why I just think it would be in everyone's best interest to leave things the way they are.
I mean, it wasn't that long ago, Chip, that Michigan wasn't all that good. It wasn't all that long ago when Penn State wasn't really all that good. There have been 5, 6, 7 year periods where Michigan State wasn't very good. So wait for the cycle. This stuff usually takes care of itself over time.
Precisely.
There have been times when the SEC East has been stronger, and there's been times when the SEC West has been stronger. It's not just the Big Ten; it's everywhere. So I guess you and I are in agreement on this. We can pretty much move on. I want to talk a little bit about one of my least favorite subjects in football, and that is the targeting rule. The targeting rule has apparently come under some scrutiny in this offseason and is being changed. Now, the long and short of it, from what I understand, and of course, I am not a rules expert because such a thing does not exist. If you've ever watched a college football game, the rules experts don't tend to be that expert themselves at times. Basically, what's going to happen, from what I understand, is that a call of targeting has to be confirmed or overturned. There's no stands anymore. There's no the call stands.
Well, I'm consider me just I'm skeptical until I see this in action. That's all. I apologize for kind of my pessimistic tone about it, but I just the reason I chuckled when you said that, okay, you're not a fan of it, is not only, I know that you're not, I know I'm certainly not, I know almost any college football fan who has been watching the games the last few years with this targeting rule is certainly not a fan of this rule. So I will withhold judgment until I see how this actually operates. I can optimistically presume that it's going to be a step in the right direction, but I can also anticipate, the inconsistencies across the board, the way that it's called, because we've seen that as Ohio State fans over the last few years.
Yeah, to me, this isn't going to change anything in terms of they're saying it's going to probably last year it would probably have changed 10% of the targeting calls, but I don't necessarily agree with that, because we've seen calls that don't appear to be targeting, they go to replay and they still get called targeting, and it looks like there's clearly no intent. There's somebody falling down and they end up, their head hits the guy because the crown of their head hits because they lost their footing, and it's clear and obvious on the replay, and it doesn't get overturned. And these things, I just think it's a debacle. Now, I don't disagree with the concept behind targeting. I think that there needs to be some accountability for dirty play, but I don't necessarily think that it's something that human beings have gotten good at adjudicating. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I think the intention is fine. Trying to cut down on the possibility of injury and dirty play. I completely applaud that. It just seems as though that there's just inconsistency across the board with the officiating crews in terms of how they interpret it, how they apply it. And, you can be watching an Ohio State game and watch Denzel Ward get ejected for targeting, a couple of years ago against Maryland. And then I'm just making this up, maybe later on that evening you're watching a game and it certainly seems a lot more blatant and nothing is called. Mm-hmm. So that's where I just I'm withholding any kind of judgment on how this is going to be applied, how it's going to be interpreted until I see it in action. And hopefully, like you said, maybe it will improve the officiating. I think they have to really emphasize to the officiating crews consistently, this is what you're looking for. This is definitive targeting versus some of the snap judgments that it seems that have been afflicting Ohio State the last few years while this rule's been in effect.
Mm-hmm. You can maybe help me out with the game. I don't remember it, but I can remember an actual play where Dwayne Haskins went to ground and got hit in the helmet with the crown of a helmet, and there was no targeting call.
That was last year against Michigan.
Okay.
That was in the Michigan game, and Urban Meyer was rightfully incensed on the sidelines. And I mean, to be fair, part of the issue is when you not only see it during the game live, but when naturally, of course, like on replay, it's slowed down, so it looks even worse. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't matter. Like in that case, it looked worse than it was. But when you watched it live, it certainly was targeting. And the fact that it wasn't called, I'm glad you brought that up. That's a classic example of, all right, how are you guys going to call this? Because there's one where it seemed blatantly obvious, but it wasn't called.
Yeah. And in full disclosure, I totally remembered what game it was. I just wanted
you just wanted to get me more agitated about it?
I knew you would jump in with that. So I know you, Chip. I know you.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, it just added to the wind up a little bit. But yeah, I don't think anything's going to change. I think we're going to be aggravated about targeting calls and non-calls for years to come until they figure this thing out. And again, I applaud the objective of keeping players safe. Certainly protecting both the player who was hit or targeted and the one who was lowering their helmet, because those can cause nasty spinal injuries. I'm the Chris Spielman school form tackle young man. See what you hit.
Oh yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I think there are too many things that are called that shouldn't be, and too many things that should be called that are not. And it just, I don't know where it's going to end. But they can talk about this all they want in the off season. They got to walk the walk, and so far we haven't seen that. Some other rule changes coming up that we'll need to be aware of, Chip. The two-man wedge on kickoff returns have been eliminated. Those will be a 15-yard penalty.
Well, let's be honest. I think more and more teams are going to go to the fair catch on the kickoff. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think by and large, I think this. I think they're trying to do everything they possibly can to eliminate the kickoff as a play because so many injuries have taken place. So this might just be some kind of a precautionary measure to try and encourage teams to be more and more accepting of just doing a fair catch.
Mm-hmm. Much in the same way, Chip, I think that eventually every state will legalize marijuana, and it's just the slow, arduous journey to get to that point. I think it's the slow, arduous journey to getting to the elimination of kickoffs in football. I think at some point the kickoff will be a thing of the past.
That's quite the analogy, but I like it.
I'm not advocating marijuana use, but neither am I condemning people for it. So, but yeah, and neither am I condemning nor encouraging kickoffs. Although I personally like the kickoff, and the kickoff return can be a very exciting play if you have the right return man. I mean, come on, Ted Ginn Jr.
Yeah, I agree.
Alrighty. The blindside blocks have been eliminated. Now, we've seen Ohio State players ejected for such blocks in the past from games, and then we've also seen opponents not ejected for the same blocks, and sometimes in those same games. So now it looks like it's just a 15-yard penalty for blindside blocks. So I don't know. They want to eliminate the decleater.
Yeah, I mean, I can see, like the concern over potential injury.
Mm-hmm. Players have gotten so fast and so big that you really do risk the whiplash on those types of hits.
Oh, easily. Yeah, I mean, you see guys just get knocked senseless. That are when they talk about seeing stars and being kind of like when they talk about defenseless player type thing, like that's basically what they're talking about.
I think it's very hard to judge some of those plays, though. There are the other saying from when we grew up, head on a swivel, right?
Sure.
And sometimes though you get locked in on the ball carrier, you may not see that block coming because you're locked in on the ball carrier. Now they may be in front of you, but that doesn't mean you see them.
Exactly.
It really all comes down to angles. Football's a game of angles, and now we've got these spread offenses, so we're seeing, I think, more of these types of hits because you've got defensive linemen, linebackers, and DBs all flowing side to side more than they used to, and because they're flowing side to side and looking upfield at the ball carrier, it just makes it a lot easier to catch them when they're not looking.
Exactly.
So I don't know. This is another one that's probably going to annoy the hell out of us at some point this year.
Yeah, when it goes against Ohio State, and probably in our estimation unfairly and unjustly, yeah, we'll be the first ones to be howling about it.
Yes, we will. Blocking below the waist now against the rules for the defense, not just the offense.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, they're just trying to eliminate what they consider these types of plays that have inflicted or could inflict serious injury.
So here's my problem with blocking below the waist. I guess how you judge it is, for example, what are the service academies going to do without any blocking below the waist?
Oh, I know. Like I said, this is going to be interesting to see how they evaluate this.
Because that's basically every single play for Army and Navy is hitting the guy in front of you below the waist. So, right. Is every play going to be a 15-yard penalty? I doubt it. Somehow I think this is going to be more out in the open field kind of thing. It's not going to be a line of scrimmage thing.
Exactly.
But a hit to the knee is still a hit to the knee in my book.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the only other thing I think that I remember them discussing in terms of rule changes was the overtime rule, and this was inspired by a marathon game, that Texas A&M game last year. You remember that one?
Well, I remember that how long it went, but I didn't actually watch the game as it transpired.
Well, I think I was watching something else, and then they were talking about it on Twitter. I think I turned over there like in the first or second overtime and watched the rest of that, and it was crazy. So now the game, once it gets to the fifth overtime, Chip, the ball will go to the 3-yard line, and each offense will have one down to score a 2-point conversion.
Okay.
So that's how they're going to decide it when it gets to 5. And each successive overtime will go like that until there's a winner. So, if each team fails or each team makes it, they'll keep going. But as soon as one team makes it and the other doesn't, then it's over.
We'll see.
Fun times. All right. So, we've talked a lot about comments that were made recently by Jim Delany, by coaches. Of course, Jim Harbaugh is not immune to talking. and to saying weird things and things that are a little bit controversial. He had a few things recently. He had to take a shot at Urban Meyer by pointing out not only that he's been successful, but that controversy has followed him wherever he's gone. Now, I think it has followed him after he's left some of the places he's gone. I'm not sure how much controversy has followed him around, but I think maybe it followed him to Ohio State. But by and large, I don't remember Urban Meyer creating a lot of waves throughout the early part of his career.
No, I mean, there was nothing that happened at Bowling Green or Utah. It was what transpired at Florida. It's what near the end of his tenure at Ohio State, and that's what Jim Harbaugh was referring to. Mm-hmm. But the smartest thing for Jim Harbaugh to have said would have been nothing about Urban Meyer, because no matter what Jim Harbaugh has said or will say about Urban Meyer, nothing's going to change the fact that at the end of Jim Harbaugh's career, there's going to be a big 0 next to his name in terms of victories against Urban Meyer. There's nothing that can change that or prevent that. So it would have been far better for him to keep his mouth shut and say, my compliments to Coach Meyer on a successful career at Ohio State. I wish him the best in his retirement, and I'm certainly looking forward to competing against Coach Day in Ann Arbor at the end of November, and I'm sure it'll be another classic Ohio State-Michigan game like we've seen before, something like that. But instead, he had to step in it and try to make it out to be, it made him look very small. It made him look very petulant in the fact that, as I said, there's nothing that will change the history of the rivalry will always reflect the fact that in the 4 games that Urban Meyer coached against Jim Harbaugh when they were on the opposite sidelines, Jim Harbaugh never won.
Yeah. So maybe he should be distancing himself from Urban's name instead of putting that name out there. But, Chip, are we absolutely sure Jim Harbaugh knows who actually is coaching Ohio State this year?
No, we don't. You never know with what, the how that mind works is something that I certainly want no part of, but I really question Jim Harbaugh in terms of, his lucidity on the,
Speaking of lucidity, Jim had some things to say about mental health issues too.
Yeah, he's trying to backpedal out of, what, he was completely fine with, at first, talking about the idea as, kind of the story with it was that he was of the opinion that when it comes to player transfers, that players that, his opinion was that every student athlete should have a one-time ability to transfer, not have to sit out. Mm-hmm. If they decide to transfer a second time, that's when they have to sit out, kind of a thing. If he had stopped there, nobody would have said anything. But then he had to go on and talk about mental health issues and how quite commonly a lot of these people, they're saying that that's a reason to transfer, and how do you know if they're telling the truth, and all these, is it truly legitimate, and all these kind of thing. And then by saying that, because James Hudson, who transferred from Michigan to Cincinnati and was declared ineligible, all it did was, James Hudson, the reason why he left Michigan, he was claiming that he was suffering from depression. So now Jim Harbaugh is looking completely insensitive and uncaring about mental health issues. Mm-hmm. James Hudson's mother, Glenda Hudson, was, I've seen on Twitter her response, because I guess she actually has a background in, as a mental health professional, and she was making the point that there's already a stigma about coming forward when you suffer from these issues, let alone the fact that if you're an athlete. And then she brought up the fact that, her son being an African-American male, that all these things like the stigma is even greater. And now Jim Harbaugh is basically saying, well, you're lying, you're just using that as an excuse to transfer. I mean, he really stepped in it, and, he should have just said, what I said was wrong. I apologize for that. I know that Tony Gerdeman wrote an excellent article about it, because the comparison and contrast between the way Ryan Day is handling these kind of situations versus Jim Harbaugh. Next thing you know, like, all these Michigan fans are bombing Gerd with, all these, things about how Michigan has a mental health, policy. And I mean, it's just absurd. And it didn't have to be said. It just, think before you speak. That's what I'm saying in terms of, the guy, he does it to himself.
Yeah, he really does, and it's a dumb thing to say, and Hudson's mother's absolutely correct. I mean, these guys are told all the time, suck it up, tough it out, and for a variety of reasons, and there's that culture of machismo, that they can't admit to having a weakness like. Mental health is perceived to be. If you have a mental health issue, it's perceived to be a weakness. It's not. It's like being sick in any other form. It's something that should be taken seriously, particularly in the era that we live in, with all of the gun violence and all of the people snapping and you read about. I mean, I try to avoid the news. I don't know about you, Chip, because I just can't deal with the horrors that you're presented with on a day-to-day basis. But I don't think you could have a day go by in a major city where there's not some murder-suicide reported in the news. So these are kinds of things that need to be taken very seriously. And if one or two people lie about it to get away with something, I think that's a small price to pay for helping the kids who need help.
Oh, I agree. It certainly is a small price to pay. And we haven't talked about it since our last podcast, but Ryan Day coming forth, and he lost his father to suicide, and the openness with which Ryan Day discussed that and described that, and how he is openly advocating for mental health for not only Ohio State's football players, but just in general, for the people that need it. He and his wife, made a sizable donation, encouraging, like kind of the idea of, don't bottle these kind of things up, don't let it become even more of an issue, to openly confront when you're dealing with these kind of things. It just seems to me that, he's, like you said, he's trying to help with the stigma that's out there that, okay, well, you can't show any weakness. Well, no, it's like it is. If there's a problem, you need to address it. And so, yeah, I definitely, you said, it's a small price to pay. I certainly agree wholeheartedly with that.
And not to make light of the situation, because I have had my own battles with depression through the years, but it's not hard to believe that anyone at Michigan would feel depressed.
Yeah, well, like you said, there was a time where they weren't really that good, and hey, but in all seriousness, I think, getting back to where we started on this segment of the conversation is that, sometimes the less said, the better. Jim Harbaugh, he didn't have to talk about Urban Meyer, he didn't have to continue talking about the transfer rule and imply that people that use mental health as the reason that they're false or that they're faking it or whatever. He could have just said how he was eager for the season. When asked about the transfers, his initial thought about a one-time transfer, people would have probably agreed with him. I know I would. So I just think, that guy, it makes you wonder sometimes why he says the things he sometimes says and does sometimes the things that he does.
I think he's a little bit of a strange character.
Yes.
But the whole thing with the chicken being a nervous bird, don't eat chicken kind of thing. It's just there's a lot of odd things about Jim Harbaugh, but that's what makes him such a great foil, right? It makes him such a person that we enjoy beating.
Yes, it does. And since you and I can both recall when he was playing quarterback for the Wolverines, years ago, like the mere fact that Ohio State has been able to exact revenge, granted several years after the fact, doesn't matter. Like, the fact that he's not playing in the game, it's still just as delicious, to see the frustration and the agony, on his face, whenever they pan over to him.
I mean, they say revenge is a dish best served cold, and I don't know if it could have got any colder, but it is pretty delicious.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so let's continue with the theme of stuff coaches have said. And, Ryan Day has said some stuff, but this stuff is very, very much of interest to our listeners because it involves actual Ohio State players. So for not everybody that's listening to this show maybe has had time to delve into everything that was said at Media Day or even since or before. So can you give us the high level of what Ryan Day has said about the quarterback battle?
Well, it's been such a commonly held belief that Justin Fields is going to be the starter. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sitting here suggesting that is not going to take place, by the time the first game against Florida Atlantic rolls around. But Ryan Day wanted to emphasize the fact that Justin Fields has not yet won the starting quarterback position. He made it abundantly clear that Gunnar Hoke is going to be battling him. He's the graduate transfer from Kentucky. Mm-hmm. That Justin Fields, yes, he has been on Ohio State's campus, but he hasn't necessarily, won the job, without any reservation from the coaching staff. So now it remains to be seen. I mean, we're not going to be able to be in the practices, and Ryan Day did say that his hope is to have the starter named within the first couple of weeks of fall camp so that the team can anticipate who's going to be the starter. More than likely it's going to be Justin Fields, but I thought from where I sit, I thought that was a good message to send to not only the other quarterbacks in that room, but also all the players on that team, that nothing is just handed to a given individual, no matter how highly touted or highly recruited they were, that you have to earn it. And so in the case of Justin Fields and Gunnar Hoke, may the best player win. My belief is that Justin Fields will be trotting out on the field when the game against Florida Atlantic on August 31st takes place. But it is comforting to know that I think Gunnar Hoke can go into practice, which probably is going to start sometime next week. I'm speculating, knowing he's going to be given opportunities to win the starting job.
What does this mean for fans of Chugs or Danny Vanatsky or Jagger LaRoe?
Well, I think in the case of Chugs, I think he is that break the glass in case of emergency guy. I think that might be, I think maybe they have made it abundantly clear that his role may be to be, that he's designated third, but it wouldn't surprise me if Ohio State is comfortably ahead against Florida Atlantic, against Miami of Ohio. I'm just thinking of, some of the early games, that they're going to try and give all three of those guys snaps. Maybe I'm being naive, but I just think the fact that Justin Fields, yes, he played some last year, but he's relatively inexperienced. Mm-hmm. Gunnar Hoke, same thing. Like he doesn't have a tremendous amount of experience. Same thing with Chris Chuganoff. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if they had enough opportunity to do so, get backups in at the quarterback position just for that necessary game experience.
Jagger LaRoe, JP Andre, do we see them this year?
No, we do not. I think in the case of, if I had to guess, and without seeing either of those young men play, I would guess that it would be Jagger LaRoe, simply because he's a redshirt freshman, whereas JP Andre is a true freshman, and I would think that they would probably lean towards somebody with the eligibility clock already ticking versus, like in the case of Andre, they could redshirt him for future use.
Are you ready for Justin Fields, Gunnar Hoak platooning, Chip?
I am not, and I don't believe Ryan Day wants that as either. I think he wants somebody to win the job and seize the job outright, and I think they want to go into the season fully comfortable with whoever they designate as the starter.
Would Justin Fields lose his ever-loving mind if he was platooning?
He could, but I don't want to pass any judgment on Justin Fields.
I mean, this is not Jake Fromm that he's going up against.
That's true. That is true. So like I said, I think Justin Fields is the prohibitive favorite, but until you or I or anyone else sees something from Coach Day announcing who's the starter, it's a battle, or at least that's what Coach Day is proclaiming.
I don't think really, Chip, that it would have been any different if Matthew Baldwin had stayed. I don't think it would have been that anybody would have been named starter at this point, and I think that's just good coaching on Ryan Day's part.
I agree with you. I think you want there to be a sense of urgency, a sense of competition amongst all the different position groups, and having been at the spring game, neither Justin Fields nor Matthew Baldwin truly distinguished themselves at the quarterback position, which is why, when you think about it, like, okay, Justin Fields, I think, he's going to have the opportunity now with, even more experience in the offense, since the middle of April. By the time fall camp begins, there probably will be substantial improvement and understanding of the playbook. As for Gunnar Hoak, he's been on campus now for, I guess, maybe a month, maybe two. So see how quickly he was able to digest and understand the playbook. So should be interesting to see how it all shakes out.
All right, Chip. What is Ryan Day, head coach of the Ohio State University Buckeyes, saying about the linebacker position right now, specifically about Tuff Borland and maybe Taraja Mitchell?
He mentioned that Tuff Borland is being pushed by Taraja Mitchell, and that caught my eye simply because it was kind of the presumed, okay, well, Borland's going to start at middle linebacker, and coming out of the spring, it was kind of, all right, like a lot of hand-wringing because Tuff Borland didn't play well last year, and we've mentioned on this podcast that...
Who did on that defense?
Right, yeah. Not only, Tuff Borland was kind of, he was an easy target, but a lot of people forgot how he was coming off of a very serious Achilles injury, which, impacted him tremendously. So the mere fact that Taraja Mitchell has been mentioned as pushing Tuff Borland makes me think that the new coaching staff is certainly, again, like they are going to make the players earn those jobs. Mm-hmm. Nothing is going to be given to them. And I guess on a tangent, the mere fact that they didn't, maybe it was just an oversight by Ryan Day at the moment, but he didn't mention Baron Browning in that same comment. So it makes me wonder if Baron Browning is going to be playing a different linebacker position, if they anticipate, Mitchell eventually overtaking Borland. I mean, it just kind of bears watching.
Mm-hmm. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that Tough Borland is not, performing up to what he should be performing at. This could just mean that Taraja Mitchell has advanced that much.
Certainly. And with a new scheme that nobody has really seen, that's like I said, come August 31st against Florida Atlantic, being able to see, all right, the linebackers, how they play, how they respond under the new coaching staff is gonna be something that not even just that first game, I would say probably for the first part of the season, getting a feel for how has the defense improved, how are the players responding.
Yes, exactly. And Taraja Mitchell will see some playing time because I think there'll be some rotation, just like there is on the defensive line. I think there'll be some linebacker rotation, keep some guys fresh, maybe give some guys that are pushing the starters a series here and there. But Tough Borland, along with Malik Harrison, were named to the Butkus Award watch list on Monday.
Yeah, and when it comes to Malik Harrison, I think he certainly flashed last year different times where athletically he was kind of that prototypical NFL outside linebacker who was capable of making some impactful plays. Mm-hmm. So that's not to take anything away from Tough Borland. I think when Tough Borland was healthy, he certainly showed. Fans have short memories. I mean, let's face it. It was, everyone's remembering last year Tough Borland not playing well. Well, the previous year when Tough Borland came in and took the place of Chris Worley, people were singing his praises. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like a "what have you done for me lately" kind of mentality. So
always.
let's give Tough Borland the benefit of the doubt, and now that he's healthy or seems to be healthy, let's see what he does with a scheme that might be better suited to his talents.
Right. Well, I'm pretty excited about Malik Harrison. He's a guy who, like you said, he makes big plays, sort of in the way that we used to see Darren Lee make big plays. Maybe not to quite that level, but I mean that's expecting a lot for anybody to play like Darren Lee played at Ohio State. But I think that's the kind of guy I see with him, is the ability to make that timely interception or deflected pass or cause a fumble, that kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. And it's going to be interesting to see, not only at the linebacker position. We're speculating that Brendan White's going to be that new bullet, depending on the down and distance, like that hybrid linebacker safety position that Brendan White will be involved. There's also a number of, as you said, like players like Taraja Mitchell coming up through the ranks. I think the idea of rotating players, that have been backups, like Dallas Gant has been talked. There have been a lot of positive comments about Dallas Gant, Kevon Pope. I mean, there's just a lot of talented linebackers that didn't really get a chance to play last year. Let's see kind of how everything shakes out, once the season begins.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Chip, is there anything else we should talk about while we're here with this July episode of the Silver Bullets podcast? Because you and I are going to reconvene shortly before the 2019 season begins. We'll do a little bit of a season preview. Maybe we'll predict the season game by game, see what if there's any position battles still up in the air. Maybe we can predict those. But that is in August. That's when we're back to our weekly rotation of the Silver Bullets podcast. So now is your opportunity. If there's anything else you want to discuss about Ohio State football, this is the time.
The only thing that I would add, and I don't want to necessarily get into specifics because they have not announced this yet, these individuals have not announced this yet, is be on the lookout for those of you who follow Ohio State football recruiting in the next week to 10 days. If the prognostication is correct, Ohio State should be adding a few more players to what is already, a highly rated recruiting class. They supposedly, probably within the next, week to 10 days should be adding a few more names to that list. That's all I will say about, I don't want to say the names. I don't want to jinx it. But just if you follow it like Michael and I do in that regard, just kind of when you see the booms from Mark Pantoni, they've been quite frequent and quite positive over the last month. I think that will continue over the next 10 days.
A lot has been made about the receiving class that Brian Hartline is bringing in, and rightfully so. I mean, just a ridiculous amount of riches that Ohio State has been able to secure commitments from in the receiver at the receiver position. But maybe a little bit overlooked is the job that a lot of people weren't sure how he would come in and do, and that's the job that Jeff Hafley has done. Yes,
Jeff Hafley. The mere fact that his sterling reputation as a teacher at the professional level, that you have players the caliber of like Richard Sherman extolling Jeff Hafley's abilities as a teacher on the field of technique, has certainly played a part in a number of the highly talented recruits who have verbally committed to Ohio State for the 2020 class.
Yeah, it's really good to see from a guy who came out of the NFL and you weren't sure how is this guy going to be as a recruiter. He seems to really know his stuff. He seems to have the energy to keep up the pace, that the insane pace, if in my view, that not only Ryan Day has instilled in his staff, but it has been there since Urban Meyer obviously was driving it very strongly. It's great to see Hafley have this kind of an impact because, that he was a kind of an unknown quantity.
Yes, and as all the players, that Ohio State signs, let's face it, they all have aspirations of getting to the NFL. I mean, I don't care, what position group we're talking about. They all have dreams, and rightfully so, of wanting to play professionally. And to have a guy who has been, at the professional level and, to be able to say, this is, kind of the way you do it in the NFL. This is how you're successful at the NFL level. I think those players are certainly a lot more apt to listen and consider, this guy could get me to where I want to go.
Absolutely. All right, Chip. Anything else before we sign off?
That was it. That was it. Keep your eyes and ears open for some booms from Mark Pantoni.
All right. Well, that will wrap up our July episode of the Silver Bullets podcast. I think that we got quite a bit of discussion in this month, even though it seemed kind of a quiet month. But as we sat down and looked at some of the potential topics, certainly a lot of it came out of media days, but a lot of it was really revolving around things that have been said recently by various people, and that's always interesting. It always makes for good conversation. So next time we convene, Chip, we're going to be in the start of our weekly Silver Bullets podcast.
Looking forward to it.
So
by then we'll know. By then we'll have a pretty good idea as to who's starting. Too.
Yeah, exactly. So this is great because it's a milestone. This is our last month with only a monthly. We'll be back before the season starts with our season preview, and we'll be weekly through the remainder of the season and whatever postseason Ohio State may end up achieving. And of course, it'll be fun. I'm looking forward to year 2 with you, Chip.
I'm looking forward to it as well, Michael.
All right, that'll do it for this edition of the Silver Bullets podcast. Thank you so much. You can find Chip and myself both at theozone.net in the Hayes and Cannon section. Chip, where else can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Chip Minnick. My last name is spelled Minnicch. And as Michael said, I'm a contributor to the Ozone on the Hayes and Cannon section, but I'm also a contributor for Athlon Sports.
All right, you can find me on Twitter at Mike36Fan, and don't worry if there's an occasional tweet about television shows or movies or just random things that I think of. Once the season starts, it's going to be pretty much Buckeye football or college football of various, whatever else other games I happen to be watching, and I watch a lot of football. You can ask my wife. I am the guy staying up till 2 a.m. watching Hawaii. So that's just my thing, man. College football. You only get so many college football seasons in your lifetime. You got to take advantage.
That's true.
All right, so that'll do it. We will sign off. We'll be back in August with the beginning of our weekly 2019 season podcasts. Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!